Hello, everyone, and welcome to OST Live, a weekly broadcast on blockchain, branded tokens, and token economies. And we feature weekly guests to discuss the latest in blockchain. This episode might be a little different because we're not going to discuss a particular product. Rather, we're going to discuss something that's been in the news this past weekend, which is the Bitcoin Cash hard fork. And it's split to become two different Bitcoins, which is Bitcoin SV and Bitcoin ABC. And with us today, we have Brian Krogsgard. He is the founder of Ledger Status, which provides educational content around crypto and blockchain. He's also the host of LedgerCast, which is also a podcast on cryptocurrency and blockchain. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So we'll start with your background. Can you give us a brief overview of when you started getting into the space and how long you've been in blockchain?
Sure. Yeah, I'm no different than a lot of people in this space where I first got involved in early 2017. I've been aware of Bitcoin since at least 2012. I went back and looked for my first ever public tweet about Bitcoin to see how much opportunity missed existed. And it was actually in 2012, I was joking about how often Bitcoin was on the front page of Hacker News at the time. And I looked at the price on that particular date where I made that joke, and it was $5.40. My first purchase of Bitcoin was not $5.40. Actually, I started paying attention to it as an investment vehicle, not until early 2017. For some reason, it always clicked with me as a technology and a transactional currency for various use cases, but it didn't click with me as an investment vehicle until 2017 for whatever reason, because I've been in the stock market since I was like 15 years old, which is a long time ago now. So anyway, I got excited about crypto in early 2017. And when I dig into things, I tend to dig in really, really hard. And I've been paying close attention ever since. So now that we're almost to the end of 2018, that's over a year and a half in the market, coming up on 2 years in the market. And it's been fun. It's a roller coaster. If you're looking at things from a price perspective, which nobody can avoid, but I come from a background of being heavily invested in open source software. So I'm a web developer, and actually I'm really involved in the web development community, specifically around WordPress, and it runs about 30% of the web as a content management system. And I've interacted with a lot of the open source versus commercial politics and relationships, and that really clicked with me in the crypto ecosystem. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. So I've expanded my reach in terms of the space that I'm paying attention to, and just really dug into this ecosystem, and it's been a lot of fun.
Great. So how long has it been since you launched LedgerCast and Ledger Status?
Yeah, so the podcast we started at the end of last year after chatting about it for quite a while. Josh Olszewicz, who's known by Carpe Noctem a lot of places, he did a lot of shows with me, and he still comes on periodically to come on and talk technical analysis and price and stuff. And a lot of my own, I guess, niche, like the reputation I've gained within the market, is more around like price analysis and looking at things from a trade perspective, more so than like, let's dig into all the fundamentals. But really, in terms of when I look to invest in a project, I really like to screen by fundamentals first in terms of which projects I'm interested in buying. And then when I'm looking for the actual entry, that's when I dig into the technicals to find out, hey, is this a good time or a bad time to buy?
Great. And it definitely is a roller coaster. And on this episode, we're going to talk about the Bitcoin Cash hard fork, which I'm sure you've experienced previous Bitcoin forks before. And it's sort of a little bit chaotic with different sides taking on different altcoins when there is a fork. We'll get into that now because with a hard fork, there's usually a hard fork because there's a need for a major upgrade to the protocol. So can you tell us what exactly happens when a hard fork goes through?
Yeah, basically you're you're requesting the participants in the blockchain to change the software that they're running, because cryptocurrencies and blockchain projects are fundamentally software. And your nodes in a proof of work ecosystem, your miners, they are running that software. So when you have a hard fork, you're asking the participants in your ecosystem to adjust the software that they're running. And the hard fork is different than a soft fork because it requires that more drastic change where you have to not just say, let's update to the next version and make sure we're up to date, but we're actually going to have to make a significant adjustment here, and it requires more change. And a lot of times the governance in terms of deciding, hey, this is something we're going to do, it's a community event. So it's actually the miners have to switch to that software to essentially say, I'm down with this hard fork. And we experienced this last year in a big way with Bitcoin Cash coming into being, and then even more so with SegWit 2x with the baseline Bitcoin chain, because in that case, it was people trying to say, hey, we need to go to SegWit and we need to use 2x. And there were the soft fork proponents, which was a different a different way of upgrading to SegWit, and there's this battle. And what happens is you create uncertainty, and markets don't always like uncertainty. So there's all these things that come into play, whether that's the price action for people trying to determine which one is being more accepted by the community, if there's a contentious fork. So what we've seen here with Bitcoin Cash is a contentious fork where you've got SV and ABC that have different ideas for what they want the chain to be. And because it's a contentious fork, you're essentially leaving it up to the underlying governance mechanisms. And since with a project like this, there's not, actual voting built into the blockchain in some way, like what's called on-chain governance, the voting occurs based on who's going to mine what. So which version of the software is going to be mined, or going to people put nodes on, and then essentially protecting yourself against attack. And since both of these were seeking to be Bitcoin Cash, like it wasn't like Bitcoin or BCHSV was going off to say, okay, we're going to be BCHSV. They want to be Bitcoin Cash. So in that point of contention, you run into completely new challenges like replay attacks and double spending and all sorts of stuff like that can happen. So it just creates a lot more drama, which we've of course seen out between these tremendous personalities that exist within the Bitcoin Cash community.
Great. So starting, from the beginning of a fork, essentially, there is a network upgrade, and all the nodes need to upgrade, to the next version. But where you get the splitting is when you have a group that doesn't go along with that upgrade, and essentially you get two chains, right?
That's right. And what happened in this scenario was, the SV side is Craig Wright and Calvin Ayre, and Calvin has a ton of mining power, hash power that protects a blockchain. So the mining is what is securing the network. And on the other side, you've got Bitmain, Jihan Wu, and Roger Ver, and a lot of mining power there as well. And so the question was, who's going to support what? And what's interesting in this scenario was that there was a lot of hash power on both sides from a mining perspective. Both camps essentially agree that the hash power that you can apply to the chain is going to be very, very important. So it really left it up to broader determinations about saying which one's going to be which one's going to be the longer chain, and all that kind of stuff.
Great. And according to the Bitcoin white paper, the longest chain with the most accumulated difficulty, and this goes along with proof of work, is the quote unquote winner, in a way that it will be considered the Bitcoin Cash, and the other forked currency will be considered the altcoin. So I guess let's talk a little bit about the people behind each side. Can you tell us a little bit about Roger Ver and Craig? Because I know Roger has been a strong supporter of Bitcoin Cash since last year, but I haven't really heard much about Craig.
Okay, so yeah, Well, both of these guys have been, all of the personalities in this thing are some of the biggest personalities from the cryptocurrency ecosystem. Whether you want to say they deserve attention or not is, up for debate, depending on who they are. Roger Ver did a ton to evangelize cryptocurrency broadly and Bitcoin specifically for years. He was nicknamed Bitcoin Jesus, whether you like that or not. And he had these ideas that he disagreed with where some of the core development process was going. So Roger and company, Roger and Jihan and Craig and Calvin, all these guys that are in this debate now between themselves, they were who split off and went with Bitcoin Cash in the first place. And now what you have is the people that went and created the fork. And at the time, they were saying, Bitcoin Cash was closer to the vision in Satoshi's white paper about being digital cash, which means, they want to keep the fees low and make it a spendable transactional currency and not just a store of value. And we saw with fees rising with Bitcoin that it was actually relatively hard to transact. Like if you want to make a $10 transaction and fees were just as much as the transaction or as much as you wanted to send, then that was really challenging. And there was a lot of politics at work and a lot of questionable behavior, like spamming the Bitcoin network to propagate your message, perhaps about why it's so expensive to do something or this or that. So they went off and did Bitcoin Cash. In that scenario, the community said, go for it. And all that uncertainty ahead of time is what took us down on a 50%, 60% drawdown in Bitcoin price. And what you're seeing now, both with Bitcoin Cash and in Bitcoin, is we've got a new era of uncertainty. And soon after, Jihan Wu, one of the participants and one of the backers of Bitcoin, or Bitcoin Cash ABC, these names are getting longer and longer, he tweeted basically, if we have to defend Bitcoin Cash against Bitcoin Cash SV, then we'll have to redirect hash power. We'll have to redirect mining rigs from BTC, from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash ABC in order to defend the network. And he threatened that doing so would drop the price below the current levels. And that's basically when we started the sell-off. So that's one side of the personalities. And Jihan and Bitmain, they make the most popular miners in the world. They mine themselves. They're very powerful. And then the Craig Wright side of things, Craig Wright claims to be Satoshi. He's not. I say that with relative confidence because he could prove it quite easily, and he doesn't. However, he's a big ego and person in the ecosystem, and he has the backing of Calvin Ayre, who has an enormous amount of power from a mining capacity as well, with the huge mining pool, and they applied that hash power to the Bitcoin Cash SV chain. So if you go to cash.coin.dance/blocks, you can see this in real time. And what is happening is between SV Pool and CoinGeek, they are defending the Bitcoin Cash SV chain. And of course, what the market has started to decide is that is Bitcoin Cash SV. And over time, we're seeing that Bitcoin Cash ABC, the Roger Ver, Jihan Wu camp, is essentially winning this battle. And we're starting to see an end to that uncertainty. And therefore, that side of the personalities at stake is winning.
Great. And I'm just going to do a screen share of coin.dance. It's a website that's been around for quite some time now, and it just shows the updates on whenever there is a hard fork. It shows updates here. So hopefully everybody can see this now. I'm just going to double check. All right, great. It's up.
Yeah. And in the early hours after the hard fork was when it was most questionable, because people were not sure, there's a lot of game theory in how you mine, whether you're doing different things, trying to attack the other chain. And the determination was which one's going to be the longer chain, how's price going to react, who has the most hash power. And even though Bitcoin Cash SV was applying a lot of hash power, it looked like Bitcoin Cash ABC was winning out. They were mining more blocks. The chain was longer. And you can see there on your screen, even though the hash rate is pretty split, ABC is become the longer chain. And yeah, I mean, essentially the market participants have decided, and market participants being basically exchanges right now, have been making statements that Bitcoin Cash will be Bitcoin Cash ABC. What's been funny is there's all these new tickers now, and like figuring out exchange to exchange what's what, and trying to find out what's the new price of Bitcoin Cash, whether that includes ABC and SV, or are they separate, and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a hot mess, but a lot of that uncertainty is finally starting to subside.
Yeah, this can get very confusing very quickly. So I want to hear what's your opinion on the role of the mining pools and the exchanges? What influence do they have on which of these two forked coins is the real or the determined Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, with the mining pools, I mean, what you're doing there is the people operating a mining pool can choose where to direct their pool. So if you have one S9, like you're just mining cryptocurrency with one ASIC in your basement, then you're basically never going to mine a block by yourself. It's going to be extremely unlikely. So people pool their miners, and when they pool their miners, sometimes you're giving control to the mining pool. So if you're pooling with one of these ones that stake, the pool may make the decision to redirect your hash power. Now, in reality, you have a little more control with that, and it's up for debate about where they're taking hash power from and redirecting it to, and all that kind of stuff. And that's their own battles that they're fighting. Personally, I do think the exchanges play a pretty outsized role in all of this, because while ABC has a longer block and maybe it's having more mining success, what's really important is when the exchanges start saying, hey, we're identifying Bitcoin Cash ABC as Bitcoin Cash. And at the time this was all happening, this played out in a variety of ways. One was Poloniex actually they paused Bitcoin Cash trading, so you couldn't even trade Bitcoin Cash. And what they did was they separated it out into ABC and SV. So now you're creating a market where the market is deciding, hey, Bitcoin Cash ABC is worth $250 and SV is worth $100. So essentially the traders, the people that are creating the valuation of the coin, were saying ABC is more valuable. And then Binance went through something similar. Kraken they kept trading BCH, but it was trading at, say, $350. So it was trading effectively at a combination of ABC and SV. And now I think what's going to put the nail in the coffin is the Coinbase blog. They paused trading completely when I think Bitcoin Cash was trading for around $415 or so. And what they've said now is that they're monitoring the network, and they said, we've observed consensus in the community that the ABC chain will retain the designation of Bitcoin Cash. So what that means is that they are not going to separate it out into ABC and SV, but they're going to keep trading it as BCH. And their reasoning for that is saying that ABC has a higher hash rate and a longer proof of work chain. And now Coinbase is saying they're resuming trading in Bitcoin Cash, which they did. And they are setting up an ecosystem to essentially allow people to eventually withdraw Bitcoin Cash SV, but they're not going to create a market for it. So that is basically the most powerful retail exchange saying ABC won. So that's where we're at now, and that relegates SV to being a minority chain, and basically of a permanent fork of a fork. So it's now several degrees separated from Bitcoin itself, and no longer part of Bitcoin Cash. And only time will tell whether they even try to continue on, or whether they abandon the project, go back to Bitcoin Cash, or what they do. Again, big personalities. Craig Wright has said that he's going to fight on. It's got a long war. It's going to take a long time. He's going to crush everything in the process. He'll have to convince Calvin Ayre of that too, because he's got the keys to continue mining and protecting the network. So, you just got to find out in time. But that's an example with Coinbase there of the exchange essentially saying, hey, this is what it is. And Bitcoin Cash ABC is Bitcoin Cash.
Great. And it might seem that like to a viewer that's not too familiar with how this works, it might seem like there's three currencies now: Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin ABC, and Bitcoin SV. But eventually, it will just be Bitcoin Cash and the altcoin, right?
Yes, with one exception. Actually, CZ at Binance, he said that what they're going to do is actually keep trading them as BCH ABC and BCH SV. So I don't know if they're going to re-recognize BCH as the victor, or re-recognize BCH ABC as BCH, or if they're going to make them stick with the ABC, which for Bitcoin Cash, that would be not great for the people that are advocates of Bitcoin Cash, because then now Roger Ver, when he goes off to evangelize, he's like trying to call Bitcoin Cash Bitcoin itself, which is his own propaganda, and he's like telling people, okay, well, where do you buy it? Well, you can go to Binance and you can buy it. It's under the ticker BCHABC, and it's like, what the heck is that? So again, you're seeing in this case the largest exchange overall making a decision to potentially to say, hey, you're stuck as ABC, which I find really interesting. Maybe that won't stick, but that's a risk. However, Coinbase and other exchanges seem to be saying, yeah, ABC is going to just continue being BCH.
Great, and that's very interesting, because this is how the exchanges sort of have a role when there is a fork.
Yeah.
Lost my train of thought. So eventually, what finalizes? Because early in a fork, it can switch, right? Either of the altcoins can have the most accumulated difficulty. So what sort of finalizes whether Bitcoin Cash ABC is the longest chain?
Well, we'll have to see over time. What's interesting is, so both of these are highly centralized. So what we've been talking about, individuals, like single parties, basically in control of each chain. So if I don't know what's going on in terms of what they're thinking, but let's say they do say, forget SV, we're not going to mine it anymore because this is not working. And the reason I say that is because Bitmain and the people behind ABC and the people behind SV, they're losing a lot of money mining right now, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it's per day, like something crazy, because it's more costly to run this many machines to mine that blockchain with the price being so low. The difference is the people behind SV are losing even more money. So what if they say, well, we're going to stop mining SV. SV essentially dies. And then what we're going to do instead is we're going to try to attack ABC in one way or the other. And the people behind Bitcoin Cash ABC, they have to continue to protect their chain by spending a lot of money to prevent something like a Sybil attack, a 51% attack. And there's a lot of weird stuff like that can happen. And what the exchanges do in that case is they say, look, this is going to take like 80 confirmations if you're trying to deposit Bitcoin Cash, and there's got to be some kind of third party confirmation that what we're saying is happening is actually happening. And Kraken even put this notice when they made Bitcoin Cash SV available to trade, and they listed it, and in their listing they were like, this is not our normal listing, this is very dangerous, you should be very careful depositing this or doing anything. So there's still uncertainty specifically within the Bitcoin Cash realm. So it may take time for whichever one wins, of ABC presumably, to recover that price. And for instance, on the gap down, when Coinbase added it back, it went from $415 down to whatever, 300. And now you've got this big gap in the middle. And you would think over time, once a lot of that weird stuff kind of gets settled, it doesn't seem like the chain's under attack, that it'll start to recover in price in some way or another. That's what's remaining to be seen.
So this is, as you mentioned earlier, this is what has been something that has been directly affecting the market, because essentially not only do you have those miners mining empty blocks even sometimes, and mining at a loss, there's a limited amount of miners, and miners are moving away from Bitcoin to either of these two Bitcoin Cash altcoins, and that essentially, right, is what's brought the market down.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially if you go to how is this affecting Bitcoin. Bitcoin was due for a move. I mean, I like to do technical analysis, and we were squeezing so tight that we needed a catalyst to move one way or the other, because as volatility is lower and lower and lower, it's like a coiling spring that is ready to jump. And this gave us really good reasoning for why that coiling spring can jump down and price can go down. So it was due for a move, but we got a catalyst, a bearish catalyst, with this uncertainty in the market, this removal of hash power off of Bitcoin on to protect the ABC chain or whatever. In terms of whether now that just means we float right back up, not necessarily. From a price perspective, you got to continue following the charts and look for the catalysts that are going to allow it to take the next direction, whether that's more down or whether that's back up in some way. We don't know exactly. One of the funny things is you've got these competing chains and they're just like going at it, but both of them are essentially, hilariously enough, it's over block size again. So they both were in favor of increasing the block size from Bitcoin. That's where Bitcoin Cash came from, went to 8 megabyte blocks. And now it's a new battle. And they're like, well, SVs, we need to go to 128 megabytes, and ABC stands for an adjustable block size cap. So it's actually adjustable over time, which is its own interesting thing. And they're battling over block size, but like they wouldn't even be filling, Bitcoin's block size, much less the Bitcoin Cash block sizes that they were never really reaching with true transaction value, much less now the block size you're talking about. So you're trying to build bigger and bigger, capacities for these chains, which the underlying networks aren't using anywhere close to the available capacity. So what we've really ended up with is this massive battle of ego and theoretical ideas for how to advance the chain. But like, it's not really in terms of actual scaling that's necessary in those chains. It's just people that are fighting.
Great. And that is something that I wanted to cover, is the actual differences between the Bitcoin Cash ABC and Bitcoin Cash SV. But let's back up a step. As you mentioned earlier in the call with Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin. So last year, Bitcoin was having scalability issues, and there's a backlog of transaction processing, and it took a while to process a Bitcoin transaction. And that's where Bitcoin Cash was proposed to try to solve for this. So can you tell us a little bit about the differences between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash? Because I think that's really important. And then we'll move on to this new fork.
Yeah. So as you get more transactions into the network, as the network is being used more and more, Bitcoin purposefully, because of its decentralized nature, it takes work. It takes effort to verify these transactions, to assure that one party is sending to the other party, and then that's confirmed by several other parties. And with enough transactions, each block with Bitcoin all those transactions were fit into a 1 megabyte block. And the people were debating, well, we need to increase this block size to be able to scale the network, to allow it to be used more, to fit more transactions, to become, this global payment system. And there was debate about whether that was the prudent move. So that's called on-chain scaling, whereas there was simultaneously an effort to have layer 2 scaling, meaning things like the Lightning Network, or in the Ethereum world, you look at like Plasma and some of those things that talk about, hey, this is how we're going to scale, go to the next level. Layer 2 scaling was essentially to offer a whole different type of scaling, where your baseline Bitcoin ecosystem is more conservatively making adjustments. You're making more of your rapid adjustments on the layer 2. And essentially you have this store value concept. Like that's like your gold vault. You don't move gold around all the time. And then you're doing all your transactions on layer 2, your speedier transactions. Bitcoin Cash proponents were saying, no, this stuff needs to be on chain. We need to grow the block size. We need to squeeze all this information into each block. We want to go to 8 megabyte blocks. Whereas the whole conversation on the baseline Bitcoin chain was going from 1 to 2 megabyte blocks, and then enabling SegWit, which was going to allow better scaling. So the Bitcoin Cash people were saying this isn't enough, this isn't fast enough, this isn't enough scaling, this isn't going to do the trick. And Roger Ver would say so many times, like, this is not the vision of Satoshi's white paper. It needs to be digital cash. It needs to be spendable, transactionable cash. And Bitcoin right now is not cutting it. We need to increase the block size to be able to fit all these cars on the highway. Right now, we got a 1-lane highway. We need an 8-lane highway. Now they're saying we need a 32-lane highway. They're barely filling a 1-lane highway. They're not filling a 1-lane highway. And that's essentially where that debate comes from. And it's just a matter of how we're going to scaling on chain and making it possible to do all these different transactions.
Great. And just to sort of reiterate once again, so last year we had the original Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash fork. And what happened there is the fork went through, and similar to what's happening today, if there was more, if Bitcoin Cash had the longest chain, then it would have been considered Bitcoin. But obviously, Bitcoin itself has the longest chain, and it stayed sort of as a store of value.
Yeah, and Bitcoin really, that one didn't really have as much contention at the time, in my opinion. When I was watching that, of course, I've learned a lot about the ecosystem over the years. Like, I was looking at that as like, Bitcoin went down in price, I want to buy, like, I want to take advantage of this. I didn't really think, there were so many people that were like, no, Bitcoin, this is Bitcoin. This Bitcoin Cash stuff is not Bitcoin. This is Bitcoin Cash. This is your own idea. And the implementation of things like replay protection to prevent double spending and some of that kind of stuff that was put in place prior to the fork made it a little less contentious, but then it became a propaganda campaign of saying, Roger Ver saying, no, this is Bitcoin, even though it's called Bitcoin Cash. This is closer to Satoshi's vision, whatever. And from that regard, I guess it made sense from like they want to make that campaign. But in terms of like, are these blockchains going to function? I didn't really see it the same way as I saw this one. Whereas this one, you really have two entities that are fighting to be Bitcoin Cash, and like, they're not implementing these protections to prevent bad stuff going on in that blockchain. And that's what made it more contentious to me, and more likely for the whole thing to potentially blow up if it all goes bad. Now, what we saw is that it was a little less drama than, I guess, worst case scenario could have been. But I see a little bit of a difference. However, it's a similar initial idea. And funny enough, similar debates about how big should the blocks be and all that kind of stuff.
Good. Yeah, and I absolutely just wanted to clarify that, because even with me, my first experience, it did get confusing when when the definition of a certain cryptocurrency is the longest chain. So you do have to wait to see what the miners do and how the market reacts.
And I thought that was a real shame too, because a lot of people, innocent people, like retail consumers that wanted to get interested in Bitcoin, it was really confusing to them, to the degree some were sending Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash addresses and other stuff like that. So it really is a big mess, to be honest. And now what you have is like the Bitcoin Cash, became essentially the secondary chain, and now the secondary chain itself is fighting. But it's probably not going to affect as many retail consumers as the Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash transition did.
Yeah, definitely, because Bitcoin Cash was competing with the original Bitcoin. That's something for you viewers. Please do pay attention to the different cryptocurrencies. They might have the similar structures. They might seem the same, but do pay attention to that. And I want to end the podcast, Brian, with do you think this is an issue or something that we will be continuing to see in future upgrades with Bitcoin?
Yes and no. I mean, the way governance works with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash is in this way, where solutions are proposed, and then participants in the ecosystem have to essentially signal ahead of time that they're in support of something. So like nodes can signal that they support this or that based on the way that they're running the software, and essentially messaging that they can put to almost vote. But if things get contentious enough, then a hard fork can be proposed. And then again, miners have to make that choice of which one they're going to mine, and it can be contentious. We've seen so many forks, and Bitcoin has stayed Bitcoin. The name Bitcoin, the ticker BTC, those have stuck with Bitcoin. Could there be a day where there is a scenario, a change in the underlying software that's so severe that we encounter something where we're like, we don't know which one's going to be Bitcoin? Yeah, it's possible because because of the way this works. And if the community ends up being split, if the miners end up being split, but the thing is that most people that are invested in this ecosystem, that's not in their best interest, because they want the value of Bitcoin to be retained. They want it to be stable. They want the software to work. So I have a feeling most of the time changes will be proposed and solved in other ways. It won't necessarily get to these dire circumstances. But to say it won't happen is, I think that's oblivious to the way all this works, because the fascinating thing about cryptocurrency and the way that the entire thing was established was it's meant for selfish participants to act in their own best interests. And it's meant to where that people that don't have your best interest, that are looking to attack the network, they can freely participate in the network. So you have to defend people that you're letting in the door to attack what you've built. And you have to build it in a way to be defensible in all those scenarios. And that's one of the fascinating and incredible things about creating all of this, that's a decentralized currency that operates in this way. So personally, that's why I see the merit in being relatively conservative with the on-chain components of what you're building with Bitcoin. And I think a lot of people, especially once all the Bitcoin Cash people go and have their own party, I think the people that are left relatively agree in terms of moving this network forward together. I think you'll see a lot more of these contentious things on the Bitcoin Cash side of things, especially if these same big personalities are the ones that are in charge, because I think a lot of times it's just as much or more about their ego than it is about the underlying components of the technology.
Great. And one thing I also wanted to add is there's been some forks that are a lot less contentious, especially an example is with Ethereum. There's been forks that have gone pretty smoothly compared to something like this. But it is community driven. It is important for if you're part of this community to pay attention and see what's going on and take action, and education is important. So
I would add, I think you made a great point, which is most of the time, a hard fork is not going to be terribly contentious. It just means you have to change the software that you're running, which is, that's something that it requires action. And a lot of times you have to convince people, hey, make this change. Most of the time people aren't going to fight with that. So it's a big decision, but it doesn't have to be a contentious decision. What these have been hard forks that are also contentious decisions. And that's the scenario where you don't want to have to happen too often. But most of the time, whether it's Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash has done a lot of hard forks, and then myriad other cryptocurrencies have as well, it's not the biggest thing in the world. Now, the Bitcoin chain does not hard fork very often. So if Bitcoin itself has a hard fork, it will be a big deal no matter what it is.
Great. And I want to end this show with, we have a question from our Reddit community. This one comes from Kid Token. And he says, "Hi, Jose and Brian. Big fan of Ledger Status. Would like to hear Brian's thoughts on the overall blockchain market and what's right or wrong about the public media's perception of this developing technology."
I don't think a lot of the public media really knows what's going on. What you have here, there's really two massively different ecosystems. On one side, you've got Bitcoin, and you've got this idea of creating a currency that's completely decentralized. It's not fiat. It's not government controlled. It's not a physical thing. It's not like a gold backed thing, or it's not gold or a store value in that sense. It's establishing this idea that software can be all three parts of what make a currency, which is the store value component, the medium of exchange. Hello. just totally blanking right now. You got store value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. And it's saying we can be all three. In my opinion, the unit of account is the hardest one to accomplish because of the massive fluctuations in Bitcoin. But then you have a whole other world of people that don't just want to see crypto as money. They want to see decentralized applications. And you've got the compute power of the Ethereum network and all the other ones that are trying to be the decentralized engine, the protocols that underlie a world where we're not relying on the Facebooks and the Venmos and the PayPals and all those people that are centralized third parties in control of what we're doing. We want to take privacy in our own hands. We want to put the user first in terms of how we can process compute power and data and all these things. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas about putting something that currently exists in the real world into a blockchain ecosystem. And what we don't have yet is the killer apps. And that's someone building something, whether that's a payment processor to overtake Venmo, which I know you guys are really thinking about, whether it's payments or messaging or whatever else. Create something with as good of a user experience and whatnot as traditional apps. And I think that's when the world will really start to take more note of blockchain more broadly. Currently, what we have is a speculative mania around Bitcoin. And a lot of times what we see when people get excited about other things, it's, hey, I want to get the same returns that people got on Bitcoin with something else. And what we really need first is for people to build really awesome stuff that people can then speculate on. And that's what we're seeing now. That's what bear markets create a lot of times, is people start to concentrate on what's the underlying product. How can we build something that is better? And it's not just slapping this or that on the blockchain, but it's creating a better product, and it's doing it in a solid way. And that'll be what turns the tide and gets people interested again. And hopefully when that comes around, the media will better understand what this is all about.
Great. And sort of adding on to that, we have a second question from KidToken, which is, what businesses or sectors do you believe can benefit from tokenization?
From tokenization, in my mind, the token economy is really hard for me to grasp. And I think it makes the most sense if the underlying tokens are really fairly invisible to the consumer. That said, if you say which underlying ideas, which worlds can best take advantage of what we have in this decentralized blockchain economy, the biggest things to me are where you have competing entities that are all interested in what is the underlying truth. Like, how do we make something known and anyone can identify that it's known? So I think of things like being able to ensure that our votes are cast and counted and they can be verifiable. So I think an election on the blockchain eventually would be an amazing thing. And I think public record keeping, whether that's real estate or some other stuff that like titles and things like that, would be incredible to see on a decentralized network that anyone can access and anyone can verify. But a lot of things we just don't know. And what happens is the projects create something that's supposed to be decentralized, but really it's just centralized on a crappy database, which is what happens a lot with a blockchain. So we'll have to see, but I think they really need to scream at us in terms of, hey, this desperately needs blockchain applied to it. And I do think there are some great places, whether it be voting or medical records is another great one, where you want institutions upon your approval to say, look at my medical records. I want to be able to access my medical records, see what people are adding to it, things like that. But you don't necessarily want that to be public, like you want it to be verifiable. So I think there's a lot of really interesting potential applications, and it's going to take some time to figure that out. People didn't know what the internet was going to be used for right away. They were like, I don't know. And now look at the role that it plays in our lives. So it's going to take some time. It's a slow game. It doesn't happen all at once. And what we'll see is, out of all of this, we'll see iterations on the technology. We'll see iterations on the participants that are taking part in all of this. And eventually there will be some pretty cool stuff that comes out of it. I would just advise people to be patient, wait for somebody to build something awesome. And then when you see that, look for the opportunities there.
Great. That's a very interesting take. I'd agree with you that it does make a great use case when the end users don't necessarily have to overcome the challenges involved with understanding this new technology. So now that we've gone through all the questions and gone through Reddit, I just want to thank you, Brian, for joining us today. And wanted to ask, for the viewers, where can people find you or learn more about Ledger Status and LedgerCast?
Yeah, thanks so much. You can follow me on Twitter at Ledger Status. I post a lot of charts and stuff because I do a lot of technical analysis. You can go to ledgerstatus.com. If you're interested in learning how to trade, you can go to ledgerstatus.com/learn. I have a program for that to guide people that aren't looking at this stuff all day. It's really meant for someone that doesn't want to just buy and hold forever. They do want to apply technical analysis to their trading, but they're not looking at it all the time. That's really who it's geared for. And yeah, I'm just paying attention to this ecosystem just like everybody else, watching and learning. And if you go to Ledger Status anything, it's probably me. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. And I went ahead and linked Ledger Status down in the description below if you guys want to check it out. And if any of you are new to this channel, OST, be sure to subscribe as well. We host weekly episodes with guests from the industry. And I just want to say thank you to all of you that are watching live. I see we're going to go to the live chat. Kid Token, Daniel, thank you guys for joining live. We'll see you guys next time.
Have a good one.